Well, good morning. We'll get going here. For you to be here in just a second. Just one of those mornings because I was in such a hurry. I ran out my Bible or my Sunday school book, so I texted her. Maybe she'll get it, bring it. I'll get scolded, I guess. But I hope the week, like I said, hope you had a great week. We're getting into the swing here of a new year, so getting back into the routine here, and so, and then, like I said, before we know it, it'll be Christmas again. That's the way it seems like the way it's rolling these days. But like I said, as we're getting back, and if you've been going back to your workplace or wherever, just thinking about those work settings right there. There's always, no matter where I've been, there's no, and again, I realize I have to tell younger, especially younger educators or coaches or whatever, there's no perfect school, there's no perfect workplace, is there? I mean, if it was, everybody would be trying to work there. So there are issues everywhere, and if you think about it, and when you get people together, there's going to be conflicts, there's going to be quarrels, there's going to be feuds, unfortunately. Hopefully, at least you can control those, as I like to say, maybe it's not sweat, over things that do matter, but sometimes they're not. But my question to open up with, to get some discussion going, in those workplaces, what generally causes conflicts? Or quarrels or feuds?
People not doing what they're supposed to and letting other people carry the blame.
All right, so not carrying, not holding up your responsibility.
Right.
All right, it's good. Yeah, I guess, because eventually there's only so much you can do, and you get frustrated with it, and then that's one of those, I think, where there probably needs to be something's got to be, there's got to be accountability there. And that's a big part of it too. What are some others? That's a good one.
Difference of opinion.
Difference of opinion? Sure. And again, it kind of gets back into what I said. I mean, if, like Monica says, when, a lot of people think probably being a counselor, you just sit in the office all day and just kind of probably drink coffee or whatever, wait till the end of the 9 weeks and hit post, a lot more to it, and stuff, and it's just like that's the thing that bothers me when I can't stand to cause work on other people to have to do more work than they need to, and again, as I said, lot more to everybody's job when we think about it than we think, but when we have to start doing other people's, that definitely is a cause there. So I think that's one of those where I'm thinking more superficial stuff, though. Stuff that really, when it gets down to it, without trying to say, what am I trying to say? Just crazy, stuff that really should be really small, but it sparks and turns into a big old conflict.
Sometimes if you think the boss, whether it's principal or the supervisor, shows favoritism
All right.
to this or that person, and it's not you, and you say, well, Joe or Sam or Sue are his favorite people.
Yeah, favoritism. All right. Yeah, that gets into it right there, and we kind of get back to different, so favoritism, and that's one of those things that kind of gets back. That's kind of a matter of opinion, isn't it? You think, well, so and so likes me not. And it's just like I've had to explain. As a coach, you play favorites, coach. Yeah, I do play favorites. My favorites are those that show up on time, do what they're supposed to do, and come and work the way they're supposed to. They do the job, and a lot. So you see right there again, just a matter of opinion, and eventually a lot of things when it comes back to a matter of opinion, what does that lead to? What's some of the themes especially over the last few months? Difference in opinion is really what? Well, my opinion is not being valued. What was the thing? What's the thing that gets us in trouble a lot again? Jealousy, which or pride. Yeah, jealousy and pride. A lot of things that, so selfish stuff. And I think here we're going to see where James they kind of, we see that where, you get all of that coming into the play. In church, I have it underneath there. What about churches that, you know, we hear, and unfortunately, especially nowadays, thank you again for bailing me out. That's one of those things where, thanks. Told you. But churches. What are some things that are causing that? Or quarrels that we hear of? Without being specific to examples, even locally or even national, whatever. What's that? Doctrine and money. Yeah. But you classify those, there's differences in doctrine, though. I think that's a pretty big deal. I think those are times where if there is an issue with doctrine, yeah, there's going to have to be. Unfortunately, there's going to have to be that, because that's got to be right. I think we all agree with that.
And, you know, like the Methodist Church, they kind of split, was it last year, year before last? I know it was, well, they came out of United Methodist, basically things around here did, and went independent, as I understand it.
Sure.
Over doctrine.
And that's over doctrine.
Over,
Yeah, and I think that's, like I said, that's really not what I'm getting, you know, I think those, like I said, sometimes those discussions have to happen when that arises. You know, I think we mentioned that last week, you know, what is it where, what was it, I had the list here, basically list, where peace based on holiness and not compromise. And we can't compromise the purity of the church. And, you know, things that's not, those things, you know, those are, in my terms, those are non-negotiables. You know, there are certain things, it's right or wrong. And when it's in the wrong, it's got to be addressed. So not really referencing that, thinking more superficial here. If you think about a lot of the superficial where, not joke around, color of the carpet or whatever, most of those, again, what is the source of all those things? Usually, like I said, selfishness and pride. I want my way. I want my way. I want my way. And again, doctrine, things like that, there's no my way in doctrine. It's only God's way, you know. But when we get into, you know, and I can name, you know, there are examples I hear, well, so-and-so this, so-and-so that. A lot of it is, and it could be, well, Scott's the Sunday school teacher and I want to be, you know, and that was kind of what James was getting to when he wrote this. If you remember in the first chapter, you know, the first thing he addressed was, you know, how position was very important in the early church for the you know, Jewish Christians. So we're referencing those things there. So, and that leads to, when we get internal conflicts, how is that damaging? How does that damage? Obviously, when we have those internal conflicts, how does that damage the church? What's the biggest thing?
Public opinion from outside.
Yeah, non-believers. Yeah, that old so-and-so church, they're fussing again. You know, especially because a lot of people now, especially today, at least a lot of times, a lot of the fussing could be kept in the house. But what's everybody got to go to now? I'm gonna air it on. I gotta go air my grievances. I'm gonna drum up support. How many likes did I get? Look at all the comments I got right there. You know, look at them getting ratio. Use all those terms there those kids use. But yeah. So, but again, you know, with that, what this kind of leading into, what James is talking about right here in this section of our book, it's called How to End Wars. And when we're talking about wars here, we're talking, you know, like I said, we're not talking about, you know, governments trying to implement policy. We're talking about internal wars. And I think our books in the opening there, it talks about, you know, different types of wars and stuff. And I found this interesting right here. It says, a few years ago, a Dutch professor took the time to calculate the cost of an enemy soldier's death at different periods in time in history. And during the reign of Julius Caesar, to kill an enemy soldier, it cost about less than $1. At the time of Napoleon, that's I want to say around 1700, 1800s there, it was inflated to more than $2,000. At the end of the First World War, the figure came up to about 17,000 per soldier. Second World War, it was up to 40,000, and then Vietnam, 1970, to kill an enemy soldier cost about $200,000. And then last year, or when this was written, and then Congressional Budget Office in the United States estimated that the cost of putting one enemy soldier in the death in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria had gone to over $1 million. You know, and it says to hear these numbers, and most of us like to say that war, both in terms of finances and in terms of tragedy, of the horrific ruin and loss of life, isn't worth the cost. But in defining war as an active conflict that has claimed more than 1,000 lives, we as human beings have only been at peace. And again, I found that this is a step. In terms of defining war as an active conflict that has claimed more than 1,000 lives, human beings have only been at peace for 268 of the last 3,400 years. That's 8% of recorded history. Over the last 100 years, the world has experienced 268 wars, and it says here that based on this person right here, it said that none of us in the room today have been alive when there was no war. Somewhere in conflict. So, but again, we're talking here that as far as Christians, there are many, and again, I'll just go ahead and say it. I'm going to use quotation marks here for wars, understanding what we mean right there. There are wars that we have, and James explains right here. If you're in our book right here, this is starting on page 125. That our author kind of explains 3 different wars that are going on with Christians. And kind of just starting out right here, the first one is that at war with each other. At war with each other. So if we look at verse 1 right here, James 1, it starts out saying, "From whence come wars and fightings among you? Come they not hence, even of your lust that war in your members?" So we're starting out right there. He asked, "For whence comes wars and fightings among you?" So we start out there with each other, and there were some of these disagreements here that James has already kind of alluded to in some of the studies that we've had right here. So it starts off in our book right there on page 125 and 126, several kinds of disagreements. We look at chapter 2, verses 1 through 9. You have to turn back there, but you remember he mentioned the class wars, rich man versus poor man. How if 2 people came into the church and one was rich and one was poor, if we catered to the rich person, then that was an issue there. Next, this one gets discussed more in the next chapter, chapters 5, 1 through 6, referring to employment. Laborers not being paid at all or not being paid a fair wage. And I chuckled at that one time. I like sharing these little anecdotes here. Assistant principal I was working with, I guess he was having something done, working on, this is just about 5 years ago, last time I was in public school before now. But I think he had a lot of landscape, I don't know. But anyway, moving brush, just, like I said, you probably count this. It's not easy work right there, especially if you don't have the equipment, right? If you have to do it by hand. So he'd hired these boys, and they'd worked from about 7 a.m. to about 6 that night. And I think at the end of the day, he paid each one of them like, I think, $40 for that day's work right there. And he went back and asked them, would they help him again? And they said no. And he was all upset and perplexed about that. And I tried to explain. I was like, well, let's see here. Let's do the math here. 7 a.m. to about 5. That's what? That's I guess we'll say 8 hours an hour. I said, you just paid them $5 an hour to move stumps and clear brush and do stuff like that. So the moral of the story for him was they realized what you're paying. I told the kids you might want to negotiate a price next time before you start out and commit to something. But anyway, But yeah, so that's one thing. Then we get into the next one right here, verses 19 and 20, of course, with each other within the church. And that kind of gets into some of the stuff we talked about last week. And I kind of hit on it, is that, one thing is being compliant. And that was in James 3 and 17, being open. And again, this is without compromising the purity of the church. But a lot of these conflicts in the church come from, there's just some, y'all gonna find this hard to believe, but there's some people that are set in their ways. They're a little stubborn. We don't know any of them do. No, not at all. But, and again, they're just kind of set in their ways, and that's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. But I think also, we have to have, being willing to be teachable and being open to reason, again, without compromising the purity of the church. I said last week, open to being taught the word of God and the wisdom of God. And a wise person knows when he's hearing truth. So again, could be some internal conflicts, from that. And then finally, chapter 4, verses 11 and 12, kind of gets into it right here. And that's personal wars. And just reading that, it says, chapter 4 and verse 11 and 12, speak not evil of one another, brethren. He that speaketh evil of his brother and judgeth his brother speaketh evil of the law and judgeth the law. But if thou judge the law, thou art not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is one lawgiver who is able to save and to destroy. Who art thou that judgest another? So speaking evil of one another. If you recall earlier on, we've looked at, patience in God's trial, practicing the word. If you remember chapter 3, that we discussed the power of the what? Power of the tongue. And we see that right there coming into play. A lot of these problems go back to leading that power of tongue. So basically, speaking evil of one another behind one another's back. Number 2 right there. We are to correct one another on principles of God's word, but our task is not to judge one another regarding issues of the heart. So, and that's a quote there from the book. So if we look over there, we go to Matthew 7 and 1 through 5 right there. We'll see what Jesus has to say about that. Judge not, that ye not be judged. For with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged. And what measure you meet, it shall be measured to you again. And why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, but considerest not the beam that is in thy own eye? Or how wilt thou say to thy brother, let me pull out the mote out of thine eye, and behold, a beam is in thine eye? Thou hypocrite, first cast out the beam out of thine own eye, and then shalt thou see clearly to cast out the mote of thy brother's eye. So we see, what does Jesus tell us right there? We gonna get in the business of judging. What's the biggest problem? We need to start. We got to start with who first. Yeah. We got to start. We got to have our own house in order, and that's a big problem. Isn't it? That we'll sit there. Like I said, it's easy to point out the faults of everybody else, and then when you look in that mirror, am I right? Oh, yeah, look. So and then we kind of look in ourselves, and I've done that. Look at so and so. Somebody, well, Scott, what about something you did? That's pretty humbling, isn't it? So we got to be careful with that. And I found this because it was in another commentary, and I'd heard this before. In the 2nd century, right there was when Christianity was beginning to really, as 2nd century Christianity began to unfold, and the faith had spread throughout the Roman Empire to some of the great cities of the time there. Christians were object of great suspicion from their neighbors and government officials because they'd given up the behaviors of their previous pagan lifestyle. And it said here, wild rumors began to circulate in some places about what Christians actually taught and did in their meetings. To clear the air and defend the good name of Christianity, a church leader in Carthage named Tertullian wrote a brief explanation of Christian practices and a critique of the unjust accusations that had been made against him. In this work, he wrote at one point that these attacks against Christianity were made out of jealousy because Christians displayed a character of life that their pagan neighbors did not possess. His statement highlighted the quality of the Christian life. And here's what he wrote. It is mainly the deeds of a love so noble that lead many to put a brand upon us. And here's the key. See how they love one another, they say, for they themselves are animated by mutual hatred. How they are ready even to die for one another, they say, for they themselves were sooner put to death. So I think right there, see how they love each other. If you had to describe how the world needs to view a church and how we should interact, that's how the church, see how they love each other. It was like, I was reading another commentary after I'd read that, and it made me almost, I'm surprised Frida didn't hear me, but he was just talking about quarrels in the church, and the guy wrote out, see how they hate each other. So that kind of gets back to that, what we said, when there's infighting in the church, what's the world want to see? See how they hate each other. And you know what I'm saying, that's pretty strong. But what does the world, how does the world need to see us? See how they love each other. And that's a key right there. So it says that,
It kind of used
go
to
ahead.
be that way. Maria and I can remember when the churches were not under attack like they are today. I mean, you turn on the news now and there are, the churches are actually, Christianity is actually under the attack in the United States, and I never would have thought that. When I grew up, the churches were respected. Even if you didn't go, even if you didn't believe, you respected the church. You didn't criticize it. And we had a few Jews, not many, but they were not criticized. They were respected, that that's their opinion and it's okay. We had a few Catholics, not a lot, but their views were respected. There was, in fact, all the restaurants at that time, because the Catholics didn't eat meat, Fridays, everybody served fish. The schools in Alabama served fish, and the Catholic population was extremely low. So I can see a big difference in how the churches are viewed today because of, and how politics is viewed. I can see a big, used to the two opposing sides could have lunch together. Eisenhower would go out and play golf with some of the Democrats. Truman went out and had lunch with some of the Republicans. You didn't have the name calling that you have today. There's a lack of respect today that we can deal with.
I've always used the example when I talk with kids today. It used to be that, without getting, and again, I don't like to talk politics in this, but it used to be, we're going to agree to disagree, but let's work together to make something better for American people. And now it's just about, hey, my side's got to win at all costs. And that's what frustrates it. That frustrates me. And but getting back to what we're saying right there again, and I think that's the, like I said, as the world looks outside, and what I look at, is yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, that we're right there. But if we show, we just got to keep showing the world what it's about. That's love, and that's the thing. If we're under attack, if we're not, or whatever, we just got to keep doing what we got to do, and that's following God's word, and and that's and it is because at the end of the day, I think when I get upset about what you refer to, I just have to go back and remember, well, you know what? At the end of the day, you know, it's all everybody's going to learn one way or the other, you know, the hard way or our way. And you know, it's just our job, I think, to just continue to display, you know, the teachings of Jesus. And you know, because again, could you say that Jesus was you know, as far as the way people view? I mean, I couldn't imagine if I witnessed what Jesus did, the miracles. And again, I'm not there, but if I saw him turn water into wine, I'd be pretty convinced right there. If I was like, and still at the end of the day, what did the Romans do? Or you know, what did the you know, at that day, the Romans and the Jews, they decided to have him crucified, didn't they? Which is part of God's plan. But when we think about it, though, I mean, it goes back to day one. We're the enemy. You know, we're the enemy. The world sees us as an enemy, and you know, that's, and it kind of gets back into as I said, just behold how they love each other. I think that's so. That's a jealousy, don't you think? I mean, is that, you think that? I mean, what you're saying right there, that's a jealousy that they see that we have a love or a compassion that the world doesn't have. I don't know. That's interesting. So.
I don't know, I know it's not the point of the lesson, but a part about, you know, Christians being under attack, I think that social media has played a big part in that, because you've got to be careful as a Christian what you put out there. And there are so many people, I see people who are non-Christians saying to people who have Christian in their biography, you know, their bios on social media, saying hateful things on social media. And boy, they're quick to say, oh yeah, you say you love God and all this, but look what you're doing. And I think that opens up a lot of you know, non-Christians to see Christians acting really hateful.
Mm-hmm.
And it is bad on social media.
So it kind of gets back into, again, what is the world? What are we displaying to the world? Are we displaying Jesus, Christ's love? You know, or other things, and it kind of gets into we kind of get a little bit into that right there. I think you know, that as we look at it right here, the next statement I have most conflicts arise from our passions not being aligned with God's for our lives. Now, when we think passion, you know, there are a lot of different ways to it, and the book here kind of refers to them as passions are things that are greater priority and of higher position in our lives than God's will. And the word that this was from kind of derived the word hedonism, which is basically the chief purpose of hedonism is to satisfy self. So a lot of our, you know, when we are at war with each other and things of that nature, really, if I've got an issue with church member A right here, really, if you go back to it, the conflict is, a lot of it goes back to my selfishness, that I'm not aligned, that my will or my passions are not aligned with what God's will is for me. And it's usually selfish choices right here. And it kind of, these first two, the book kind of, it almost, to me, it almost gets them backwards right there, the way it explains it, but I went with it right here. So if we look right there in page 124, 120, if we look at 127 right there, on page, in our book right there where it says personal wars, just a few things right here. The saints were speaking evil of one another and judging one another. Here again we see the wrong use of the tongue. Christians are to speak the truth in love. They are not to speak evil in the spirit of rivalry and criticism. If the truth about a brother is harmful, then we should cover it in love and not repeat it. And if he has sinned, we should go to him personally and try to win him back. It says James is not forbidding us to use discrimination or even to evaluate people. Christians need to have discernment, but they must not act like God in passing judgment. We must first examine our own lives and then try to help others. And then down there at the last, it says, we are not called to be judges. God is the only judge. He is patient and understanding. His judgments are just and holy, and we can leave the matter with him. And I think, you know, we forget about that sometimes. You know, at the end, who's got our back? God's got our back at, you know, at the end. And so that's as I said, we just gotta make sure that we gotta turn loose of self, start letting God have it, and God have his way right there with us. So number 2 right there, the next war is we've had war at each other, war with ourselves. And that starts off with verses 1b through 3. Come they not hence even of your lust that war in your members? Ye lust and have not, ye kill and desire to have, and cannot obtain, ye fight and war. Yet ye have not, because ye ask not. Ye ask and receive not, because ye ask amiss, that ye may consume it upon your lust. So, the first thing right here, and it's a key point, and what I'm starting to see right here, again, this is Scott's commentary right here, this is just my opinion. We studied Daniel. What was his big thing? What was getting everybody in trouble when we studied Daniel? What was it got all the kings that he was under? They'd be doing pretty good, and what came in? Pride. And now James, it seems here as we are talking, and again the key of this study was maturity. One of the biggest, it seems like his biggest thing when dealing with maturity is what? Selfishness. That seems to be a theme I'm seeing right here. Is a lot of problems that we have go back to our selfish, our selfish outlook. And, we're talking about that. It says selfishness puts us in conflict with ourselves. Because why were humans created? Why were we created? Why did God create humans? Have a relationship with him. Genesis 1:27. Again, if you're struggling to find Genesis chapter 1, maybe you need to open it. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. Isaiah 43:7. Even every one that is called by my name, for I have created him for my glory. I have formed him, yea, I have made him. So, and again, what causes this? Why were humans created? Well, we see right there. We were created in God's image. What's God's image? Just superficially, when I first hear it, it's like, I look in the mirror. God look like me? God, no, I don't think it's not physical appearance. What's the image of God? Or characteristics of God. Let me put it that way. What are some characteristics of God? Fairness. Love. Goodness. Holiness. Perfect. And when did we lose that? What was that? Adam and Eve, right? When we had to fall, that's where now that began. So when we are selfish, that goes against the entire image of what God is. Because God's about love. And so selfishness is a direct conflict with the intention from these verses. So that was one thing when I was studying this, that kind of really spoke to me. I was like, wow, when I'm being selfish, because, you think about it. What was the ultimate act God did? He gave us his son to die for us. That's about that's a complete 180 of selfishness right there, isn't it? So, just kind of looking at other things right there. So,
in there it says ye kill. And I, again, not talking about, you think James is talking about physical murder there? It says in verse 4 again, let me find it here. Oh, verse 2, I'm sorry. Ye lust and ye have not, ye kill and desire to have and cannot obtain. So, I don't think he's talking about physical murder there, but just the murderous attitude. You think about it, these attitudes here. Anger, bitterness, hatred, and contempt for others. Those aren't good attitudes to have, are they? And so, again, selfish desires lead to those. And look what so and so's got. It kind of gets back to what we said. Well, the boss likes him better. So that gets back all to that. Then we get to continuing in right there. You lust, you have not, and desire to have and cannot obtain. And a lot of that is the pursuit of self-gratification. And we look at that on page 128. If you're following along there, kind of gets into that. Some of the things there. Selfish desires are dangerous things. It says down there at the second last paragraph, and they lead to wrong actions. They can even lead to wrong praying. When our praying is wrong, our whole Christian life is wrong. And it has well been said that the purpose of prayer is not to get man's will done in heaven, but to get God's will done on earth. And I think I know I'm guilty of that. Dear Lord, give me that head coaching job. Just, and then, or whatever. Please. And I thought that was a great statement. Is the purpose of prayer is not to, we don't pray to God to ask Him to do stuff for us. We need to pray Him to lead, guide, direct us to do what we want, what He wants us to do for Him. People who, and moving on to 129 right there, it says people who are at war with themselves because of selfish desires are unhappy people. They don't enjoy life because instead of being thankful for the blessings they do have, they complain about the blessings they do not have. They cannot get along with people because they are always envying others for what they have and do. And that's a true statement right there. And again, adolescent kids are adolescent kids. I had a friend of mine. She knew what she gave me for Christmas. She gave me 3 bottles of Heinz ketchup because she knows I like Heinz ketchup, so anyway, we was in class, and this person that was related to this friend was in there. Hey, we got Coach ketchup for Christmas, and this one girl, one person was going, ketchup? Well, I said, oh yeah. I said, I would want a lot more than that. I said, well, that's okay. I don't have to have much. And this is something, and I shared this with her, and it's something that I read. I can't remember how many months ago it was and stuff, but it was kind of I told her, I said, that's all I need. I said, because I'm rich. And she kind of looked, what do you mean, I'm rich because I got enough. And that's, ever since I've kind of tried to approach wealth from that view, it's kind of changed. I forgot where I read that, but I got enough. I'm blessed. I have a wife who loves me for whatever reason. I don't understand why. Because I'm pretty hard to live with because I'm messy and stuff, and I can get locked in on stuff sometimes. But great family, loving church family, mother. Again, you just look at it. Yes, sure, it'd be nice to have a few more commas in the bank, but I don't. But that's all right because I got enough. And I heard one of the youth right there say something. God may not want you to have all that money because He knows He'll get you in trouble. Who knows? I don't know. But anyway, it gets back into that self. People like that. I won't say like that, but you see people, they're never satisfied, and it's kind of sad. This conflict continues because we ask God with wrong motives or attitude. Luke 22 and 42, Jesus gives us the example right there on how we should ask. Luke 22:42. Father, if thou be willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. And you know, what was about to happen for Jesus when he was praying that, you know, he wasn't trying to get a job, was he? You know, he was facing you know, but look at his attitude, and that's what we should do. All right, so quickly right here, we gotta go right there. So, the war of worldliness leads not only to war with each other and war with ourselves. We are created by God to love God, to be with God, to live for God in the will of God, and the glory for God. And like as I said, when we are being selfish, we're going against that image of how we were created. Finally, last thing right here, war with God. And that's verses 4 through 10 right there. And something here. And we see here, ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that friendship of the world is enmity with God? And when he calls them adulterers and adulteresses right there, he ain't accusing them of breaking the seventh commandment. Okay? He's referencing spiritual adultery. Spiritual adultery, choosing to love people and things of the world more than God. Break the law of God, because here's the deal. Adultery breaks, when spouses, if they commit adultery right there, it's not against the actual law. You don't get put in jail for it. But you break God's law and you break the heart of your spouse, don't you? Think of it like this. When we commit spiritual adultery, when we choose to love the world over a God, we break the law of God and break God's heart with our friendship with the world. And well, that kind of stopped me right there. It made me feel I like, ooh. So in the world that's translated here in verse 4 is from a Greek word called cosmos, K-O-S-M-O-S, which doesn't refer to physical earth or physical universe, but the human-centered value system of fallen mankind. The goals of cosmos is, and I'll just save space, I put self-glory, self-fulfillment, self-indulgent, self-satisfaction, self-entitlement, self-governing, and self-serving. We are to love the people in the world, but not the world itself. And unfortunately, we get those things kind of mixed up. So, verse 6, thought this is something right here again, one of those, just when I'm feeling so bad for myself, I get a little hope. But he giveth more grace, wherefore he saith, God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace to the humble. And we are saved by grace, but when we are saved, that didn't promise that we was going to be perfect, was it? It just says that, hey, we've understood that we still have a tendency to wander in our walk with God. We're going to wage war with ourselves and each other and God. And we need more grace. And in those next things right there, James describes the grace of repentance in these verses right here. So he talks about the removal of human pride, because that's the first thing. What's the first thing you got to do to repent? God, I'm a sinner, right? You got to admit that we're a sinner. And with deep humility, as we see how far we have wandered from God, and by submitting to God and resisting the devil, it allows us to draw nearer to God so we can receive grace to cleanse our hands and purify our hearts right there. And that's always the case. When we wander off, and for a lot of times it's like, well, why should I now? But that's the time when you submit yourself and you show that humility. That's when you grow. That's when you, hopefully you don't wander off, but when you do, that's the good stuff right there. When you realize it and you show that humility, you submit to God, resist the devil, and that draws you near, and you can receive. Really receive and feel that. So in conclusion, right there in pages 130 through 34, I won't read those, just to sum it up right here. It says to avoid wars mentioned above, there are three enemies that we need to avoid. That's the world,
the flesh and the devil. And I got those kind of the verses right there in the pages in the book there to look for further reading. And if we want peace instead of war, we need to do the following. We got to submit to God, draw nearer to God, and humble ourselves before God. And it kind of gets back, if you can just put one word in there, what leads to wars as far as Christians? Selfishness. Selfishness. So that is good. So that's, like I said, that's one of those I can continue on talking right there. So, other thing I got right here, and again, in the spirit of that, and I'm always here, if you got suggestions and stuff for me, I'm always open and willing. I went ahead for next week. I've kind of, it's not necessarily won't be the handout to fill out, but it kind of is my thought process of where I'm thinking on next week. It's kind of a study guide for next week as you read on right there. So try that out, see if you like that. It's kind of got, because what I do is when I start out, I start writing down questions right there, and it kind of guides me to where I'm heading for the next week's lesson right there. So if you want to look at that, if you like to prepare, I think that'll help you out right there, and head that way as we build on James chapter 4. It's not a class, you don't have to keep pushing. I'm just kidding. I'm giving a hard time. So like I said, we'll see that. Maybe that'll help us out right there. But appreciate the input. I always, like I said, I do a lot of the talking, but I like it when you guys participate. So nothing else, we'll close with a word of prayer. Lord, we're thankful for this day and thankful for all your many blessings, Lord. Lord, we just ask that you'll just give us a heart, Lord, that keeps us mindful of trying to avoid the selfishness we discussed today, Lord. And Lord, again, just lead, guide, and direct us where we do your will, Lord, to be pleasing to you. Be with us as we go through the service. Lord, be with those who may not be able to be here for whatever the reason is, Lord. You know that. Give them comfort, Lord. Let them feel your sovereignty of all things, Lord. And Lord, again, just thank you for your son, Jesus, who died for our sins, Lord.